Hey, it's Dawn Kennedy again, and yes, I'm also an attorney. I have to go to court today. I figured I would give you the top three reasons businesses need legal support, or I guess the places where I see business clients getting in the most trouble. And then I have a little bit of a bonus for you as well. But what are the things that attorneys often need to jump in and try to solve? So the first one is contract disputes. Contracts, if there's any ambiguity, meaning that one word could have, two different meanings, we end up sometimes having to negotiate that in court. Or if there's a change and it wasn't put in writing, or if the change was actually a little fluffy bunny, we could end up having to go and figure that out. The one thing about contracts and commercial contracts, now again, this is not legal advice, this is just for education. But commercial contracts, generally the courts look at this as kind of more sophisticated people doing these transactions. So make sure that your contracts are specific, they're in writing, you get them signed and dated. And if you have a contract need, especially for certain types of contracts, you're going to likely want to have an attorney review it for you. There are clauses and terms and things in contracts that people may not recognize or understand, and they just kind of read it over. They got this contract from a vendor or a supplier. They read it over and say, oh, it looks good. But, it wouldn't hurt. There are a lot of business attorneys that can do just a flat fee, or they can do just a quick hour or two, whatever. You can find one in your jurisdiction, I'm sure, that would be willing to do contract review and just advice and let you know, hey, listen, I'm looking at this and I just want you to know that's what this means. Is this what you intended? Because the thing about contracts is it's all about the intention of the parties and what you planned to do. So again, this is not legal advice. This is just education. But this is where I see people getting in trouble is contracts. Either they're not in writing, changes are not in writing, things are not memorialized, or two different things were intended. So for example, if you're going to sell oranges, say oranges, not fruit, or citrus. Be very specific. And be very specific also about, how you're going to go ahead and do the contract as well. I have often seen issues where we're renegotiating terms for whatever reason, and there are terms that don't end up being addressed, like whether or not something has a shipping cost to it or something like that, and it's not included. And, by default, what are we doing? Who's paying shipping, right? So generally, that's not a huge issue, but it's something to be aware of. You're going to want to make sure that your contracts are what you intend to do and how you intend to transact business, and both sides can agree. A lot of times, these types of negotiations don't end up at trial per se, but it does end up causing some distress. And, you want to make sure that you fully understand what you have to do and the other side fully understands what they have to do, and put it in writing. Just put it in writing, get a signature on it. All right. So the next place I see people having issues is in employment and hiring employees, especially early on companies when they hire their first employees. So first of all, they don't always know that they are going to need to sign up in a lot of states for like workman's compensation. There's a cost there, and they don't understand that there's payroll taxes and that you have to file these payroll things every quarter, like 940s and 941s. I forget which one's annual, which one's quarterly, because I'm not a CPA. But they don't necessarily look also at the other things, like a lot of states, there are requirements about how many hours you can work without a break, whether or not a minor, let's say you hire somebody who's a high schooler, and whether or not they can work more than 6 hours, 8 hours, or if they can work past 10 p.m., those kinds of things. Make sure you know the rules around employment. Make sure that you are following the rules and the laws. Wrongful termination things. I'm not an employment attorney. I don't really touch that stuff, but wrongful termination claims sometimes will stem into these other sorts of violations that the employer didn't know they were doing anything wrong. So, if somebody says, hey, can I take my break at 11 instead of at 10? And they say, yeah, sure, go ahead. That actually could come back to bite you depending on the jurisdiction and depending on some other factors. The other thing is some people don't understand that there are tests to determine whether somebody could be a 1099 contractor, an independent contractor, whether or not they need to be a W-2 employees, and what the rules are around things like salary, where somebody is exempt from overtime. A lot of times people say, well, I pay them, a salary. That doesn't mean that it's anything other than you pay them a flat amount broken up over, let's say, 50, 52 weeks. The salary in a lot of jurisdictions has very specific rules because they would be exempt from overtime. So make sure that you know that stuff. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not trying to tell you not to hire employees. Just make sure that you know the rules around that, because that is something that truly ends up becoming a mess at times. The next one, regulatory filings and things like that. Do you have to renew your business LLC or your corporation? Do you have to keep your meeting notes? Do you have to do these regulatory filings every year to stay compliant with all the things, not just your taxes, right? There are other things that you may have to do. You may have to report something like your unemployment numbers. You may have to, there's just tons of things that you may have to report. And I want you to keep that in your mind, that there are times I see people get suspended, their entity gets suspended because they just didn't file like a document, an information update, something like that, that might have cost them $15 and it wasn't going to be a big deal, but they forgot about it, or they didn't do it, or nobody reminded them to do it, or they didn't realize they had to do it. And then we end up potentially with some fines and penalties that you pay because you're late. So let's make sure we stay on top of those regulatory filings as well. That is another area where I see people getting upset being a business owner and having issues with that. And then the last one, this is kind of a bonus. And this is where people may be having cash flow crunches or issues with the business, collecting revenue or receivables or whatever, and also payables. Make sure that you are over communicating with people who owe you money and people you owe money to, right? So business transactions, kind of the money comes in, the money may have to go out. And sometimes there's a toad in the road. Maybe a supplier ended up having an issue, or a vendor is late paying you, or you had some kind of unexpected thing come up. Please make sure you're over communicating with everyone. Full transparency. Hey, we're having an issue. Do you mind if I send this 5 days late? Get it in writing. That, it's like send an email, get it in writing, and make sure that you are, being very forward thinking as far as if you need that kind of, grace period, or you need something to happen, or if you are trying to collect payment. And you can be flexible and say, hey, listen, let's do half and then half in 2 weeks if this is causing us, distress in your company or whatever. The whole thing about being in business and doing these transactions and providing your gifts to the world and taking the risks that entrepreneurs do is that there is more on you than there is typically the average person who, has a job. Obviously, they expect to get paid and their benefits and those kinds of things, but they're probably not, unless they're in compliance or in contracting or something, they're probably not worrying or focused on these other things that you have to do. And so I want you to just realize you have a great position of flexibility and negotiation as an entrepreneur that the average person in a job may not have to advocate on behalf of the company if something happens. So please make sure that you are absolutely positively being 100% truthful, honest, transparent, and you are taking care of business. People will respect you for it. You'll protect your reputation, and you probably will be fine. If you do know that you need a business lawyer, the other thing I want to recommend is a lot of state bar associations have referral services and things where they can help you try to find a lawyer if you don't have one. If you are, however, in business, you might want to have a conversation with one and feel out a few of them, have a couple of discussions, even if you don't need legal work right now, just so you have somebody that you feel that you would connect with and be able to do well with and was a good fit for you and your company, just in case a need arises. Last tip, don't ignore court filings. I have had in the past business clients before I met them who had received a document and they attempted to work with the other side, demand letter, and let's say they wrote back to the demand letter or whatever, and then a lawsuit gets filed, but they think because they responded to the demand letter, everything's okay. It's not okay. If you get served with something, make sure you find a lawyer to support you, because in a lot of states, the company itself needs to be represented. So the individual running the company in their individual capacity could probably show up pro per. Again, check your state, but the company itself usually has to have representation depending on where you live. All right, so again, this is not legal advice. This is for information only, but these are the places that I see small businesses sometimes facing some challenges, and I hope you find this helpful. Take care.